Hi, movie fans. In this synopsis, we will be taking a look at Deep Cover. This is the last picture that Laurence Fishburne was credited as Larry Fishburne. Let us know in the comments what you think of this crime story. As always, likes and subs are greatly appreciated. It's the holiday season in Cleveland back in '72. A young Russell Stevens is with his junkie father who is sniffing in front of him while also warning him to stay away from drugs. His father pulls out a revolver and asks him what he wants for Christmas. He then goes to rob a liquor store and shoots the proprietor in the process. When he cheerfully waves the cash at Russell, the proprietor blasts him in the back with a shotgun. Russell gets out of the car to watch his father die and promises this will not happen to him. Cincinnati 20 years later, and Police Chief Carver is interviewing Russell Stevens for an undercover position for potentially up to 5 years. He says Stevens has the psych profile of a criminal with unresolved issues and hidden rage. Standard for a cop then, which would make him ideal along with having no family. He tells him the one rule: don't blow your cover. 2 weeks later, Russell is in LA. He narrates that he thought taking this job would be the worst decision he ever made, and adds that in hindsight he was right. He checks into a hotel, and on the way to his room, he is advised to avoid Belinda, who has her door wide open across the hall from him. Russell has his first briefing with Carver. From now on, his undercover name is John Hull. He is told they are going after the big dealers, not the street dealers. Firstly, Felix Barbosa, who's mid-level. He's supplied by Anton Gallegos, who moves 40% of the shit in LA. His uncle Hector Guzman, a Latin American politician, helps him get the product into the US. Russell, or John as he is now known as, asks if they are going after Guzman. Carver says he is too big. We do it orderly and go for Barbosa and Gallegos first. John starts working the streets in Hollywood, buying a bit here and a bit there, then reporting back to Carver to log the buys and re-up on cash. One of the players he takes an interest in is Eddie. He drives a red Cadillac and supplies the street dealers. It is rumored that he gets his gear from Barbosa, so John has to find a way to get to him and through him. John sees one of the street dealers get executed, but he is able to get his face recognized by Eddie. John knows that if he hangs out in the right places, Eddie will eventually talk to him, and he does. Reporting back to Carver that he has made contact with Eddie, and Eddie is buying from a man called
David Jason,
who
apparently is supplied by the Latins.
Carver tells him he wants him to buy from Jason and get to the Latins. John says we don't want to rush this, but Carver says yes we do.
Rush it, please.
John goes to the local crack house looking for Eddie to score a bird. Eddie asks him if he has got the cash, and John says, yeah man. Sooner rather than later, Eddie gets his collar pinched, and to get himself out of the shit he offers up John to the cops. This turns out to be just the break John needed. David Jason is teaching his daughter math when there's a knock at the door. Opening it, he sees Felix Barbosa. Jason is not happy that Barbosa has come to his home, but Barbosa tells him about Eddie getting pinched and rolling over, saying it is only a matter of time until he rolls on us, then says he is going to have him killed. Jason says, if there is a problem, I will kill him myself, just as his wife comes and hands him the phone with Eddie on hold. Jason says Eddie won't roll on them and answers the phone. David Jason goes to a boxing gym to meet with Eddie and John. He asks where John is shifting his product, and John tells him it ain't his business. Jason stands up and says this guy is a cop and walks out of the gym. John gives Eddie his number and then leaves while Eddie rushes off to speak with Jason. John leaves the gym, and the two cops who busted Eddie are watching him and say this must be our bust. Later, Eddie meets with Jason and is telling Jason that John is sound and they need to do the deal. Jason says don't F with me and gives him the key, and Eddie drives off. When John gets back to his apartment, he gets ambushed by a clucking Belinda. John gives some money to James to get some proper food. Belinda mentions how she is HIV negative and then tries to sell her son to John for $3K and then $2K. As John leaves, she says that she will be his old lady. Oh my, this poor girl is in a bad way. John goes to meet with Eddie to buy the kilo, but as he is making the buy, the cops roll in with lights and sirens on. Eddie does not act surprised and instead holds a knife to John, who jumps out and makes a run for it while Eddie the Snake drives off. John is caught red-handed, and a policeman called Taft punches him in the gut and says,
"How you doing, Judas?"
John is taken in for interrogation and tells Taft he doesn't know Eddie's name. Taft apologizes for hitting him and then deduces he is from back east, not Oakland. He says that his selling drugs is like putting a gun to his children's heads, and that's a no-no. He gives John a prayer book, and John makes fun of him and throws it across the room. John is up for arraignment and brought before the judge. He is surprised to see David Jason is a lawyer and is there to represent him. Once court is in session, Jason approaches the bench and tells the judge that the substance John was caught with was baby laxative, and therefore the prosecutor has decided to drop charges. The judge dismisses the case and Jason leaves the courtroom with Taft and Carver watching on. Jason takes John to a pool hall where they meet with Eddie and Barbosa. Eddie is very surprised to see John. Jason says John kept his mouth shut when he got busted, which is more than some can say. Eddie starts going on the defensive, saying it was only John and he wouldn't give up anybody else, but the others do not share this view and feel they might be next. Eddie starts groveling to Felix and offering him money. Barbosa says he wants 100 grand in 10 seconds and starts counting down. Eddie panics and stabs Barbosa with a fork. Barbosa at first tells him to go home and then beats him to death with a pool cue while the others watch on in horror. Jason and John are getting closer, so Jason tells him about a new designer drug he is working on that is currently legal. He doesn't give him the details, but does give him 2 kilograms of blow, one he already paid for and one on consignment. John says you can't shift it now you've lost Eddie. If you make me your partner, I will help you. Jason says I don't need a partner, I need a salesman. John says you need a partner because Barbosa will not back you with this new designer drug. When John shows Carver the 2 keys, Carver tells him they don't have the money in the budget for it. John asks him what to do, and Carver tells him you are a drug dealer, so go deal drugs. John narrates that he thought he was going to be making a difference, but ended up selling drugs to pregnant women. He goes on to say he hated doing it, but was good at it, and it's a lot easier than being a cop. Jason and John pull up to their spot. The man who killed the kid earlier is giving one of the women shit. John pulls him off her and points a gun at him. There is a standoff until the man eventually leaves, saying, "I'll be back." Jason takes John to meet a woman called Betty and introduces John Hull as his new associate, his new Eddie, Betty says. Jason gives Betty a briefcase with $50,000 inside. Jason explains to John exactly how they launder their money through African banks, while Betty tells him he talks too much. She offers John a line, and when he refuses, she says she does not trust him. Jason goes on to say John is a magnificent beast, but John fronts up to him and warns him. They then leave. John is sitting and talking with the street girl when the killer from the previous night pulls alongside and shoots her in the head and tries to kill John. Jason says they have to kill Ivy for shooting one of John's workers, or he will look weak and invite challengers. They can also take over Ivy's spot. John says that if he does it, they will have to be partners 50-50 down the middle. Jason idiotically agrees. One night, Jason gives John a ride to the club where Ivy is dancing with his girl. John follows him into the restroom, and when Ivy confronts him, he shoots him a couple of times and escapes via the back exit where he meets Jason, who welcomes him as a partner. John is shaken by this and narrates,
I had killed a man
who looked like me, and then goes on to say that neither the police nor anybody came for him and he could have killed more people if he wanted to. A chemist is pitching his new designer drug to J&J. He says it is an analog of cocaine and is perfectly legal, adding that for $5 million he can supply the whole West Coast at $30 a pop. Jason says to John, we need to get the mullah together, then we will be rid of Barbosa. In the next meeting with Carver, John is told to get a nicer apartment and spend some cash to start looking like a big player. He then, with some glee, asks what it was like killing Ivy. John is surprised and avoids the question. He says, when they take over Ivy's spot, Gallegos should approach them. Carver says, good, let's bust him for the quarterly report. John, somewhat deluded by his job, asks him what he is doing. Carver lists the social problems with crack babies and says that a generation in the black community are being destroyed before they are even born by pushers like these people. John follows his orders and gets a nice place in the hills, some new threads, and a flash motor. One evening he goes to get Betty too. He visits her at work and puts on the moves, and they are soon getting it on with each other. John entertains Jason at his place and is being precious about the furniture, but presses Jason about meeting Gallegos and says if we buy 20 keys, he will come to us. John narrates that all was going gangbusters. Carver was happy. He was calling the shots in the partnership, but then it all started to go wrong. They have a meeting with Barbosa the day of Gopher's birthday. Barbosa asks what he will do with 10 keys, saying you're always late on 2. John says it's 20, not 10. There are markets they need inventory for but don't have. Barbosa says he is impressed with his moxie and asks him to work for him. He starts denigrating Jason and shitting on his designer drug idea, saying it is a ruse and he is not investing. He insults Jason more, and even Gopher and John are saying to chill. Jason's temper blows and he slams the table. Barbosa clears the room and plays a sadistic game of slaps and finally drives his diamond ring into the back of Jason's hand. John narrates that right then he knew Barbosa would kill Jason if Jason didn't kill him first. Sitting with his wife later, she says he has to get out of the business. He has a daughter and wife who love him. What more does he want? He says,
I want my cake and eat it too.
Hernandez, the dirty partner of Taft, goes to see Barbosa, saying that he needs a bust to avoid suspicion. Barbosa says he has got a Jewish lawyer, and Hernandez says someone black would be good. Barbosa says he can have 3 people, Jason, John, and Betty, but can they make Jason dead? Hernandez says that.
Can we arrange?
In his next briefing with Carver, Carver already knows what happened with Jason, and he orders John to stay away from them when Jason and Betty get busted, even if it means all of John's undercover work goes down the drain. Jason, John, and Betty are on the way to the buy. John is getting cold feet and warning the others, but Jason is adamant to make the deal. They pull up to Barbosa's limo while being observed by Taft and Hernandez's team. After they make their hellos, John tells Barbosa that it don't feel right. He pulls a gun on Barbosa and finds he is wearing a wire. John then orders them all into Barbosa's limo. Hernandez grabs one of the police sharpshooter's rifles and says he has a gun and tries to kill Jason but misses and hits Barbosa's bodyguard. Taft freaks out on Hernandez and calls the squad cars in to take them down. John drives the limo and starts trying to evade the cops. Jason has Barbosa at gunpoint and starts calling Barbosa Felix the Rat, and then tells him to get out of the car while they are driving. Jason is pissed and says if Eddie had to die, then Felix has to as well. He even pulls the gun on John when he tries to intervene. Jason shoots Barbosa in the hands for revenge and then kicks him out of the car. Barbosa is hit by a police car and dies. John manages to lose the remaining cops and they escape. Sitting in the limo afterward, Jason is buzzing with adrenaline. Betty says she wants out of the business and leaves them. Jason says that they need to offer as well, but John says no, he will kill Jason if she is hurt, and he then takes responsibility for her. Later that night, John turns up at a pistol-wielding Betty's place, and they are soon relaxing together when one of Gallegos' men sneaks in and holds them at gunpoint. They finally get their meeting with Gallegos, who says by killing Barbosa they have taken on his $1.8 million debt and have 3 days to pay. If they do, they can replace Barbosa with the same deal of 30%. He says he should kill them, but he will let them live if he can get something from them. He says he will start with this and pulls out John's earring. Now that he had got to Gallegos, John goes to report to Carver. Carver is pissed and tells him that it is over. He violated a direct order and now a CI is dead, 2 cops are injured and a vice cop is dead. Carver gets out of the car and pulls a gun on John, trying to get him to relinquish his. John works out that Carver is protecting Gallegos and asks if he is the new Noriega. He says you are allowing him to sell this shit on the streets and using me to help. He goes to give his gun to Carver, then overpowers him and starts questioning him. He says that the uncle, Hector Guzman, is now a darling of the State Department and they are backing him to be president. John is mad that he was lied to, but Carver says he was lied to also. Carver says it is all shit. Come with me to Washington and we can get some clout, as that's all there is. John says he can get more clout on the street. He says, I'm a cop pretending to be a drug dealer, but I ain't nothing but a drug dealer pretending to be a cop. He tells Carver that he quits and drives off, having his first ever drink and is soon trying his first JO2. John goes to a meeting with Jason and Gopher, who tells them that Barbosa only owed Gallegos $1 million at most, which John and Jason have recovered. Gopher says Gallegos is going to kill you. John and Jason go to see Gallegos with the $1 million. Gallegos starts to squeeze them, saying that it is short and they will need to pay another $1 million. John pulls a gun on Gallegos and kills him. They take a henchman who leads them to Gallegos' stash house with $100 million in cash. They tie up the henchman and tell him to deliver a message to Guzman: "We got your money and you need to talk to us." John tells Jason to move his family while he goes to the old hotel to get some money and see Belinda's kid, James. At the hotel, John sees that Belinda has died of an overdose and James is sitting in the room with her dead body. Taft is there and blames John for Belinda's death, saying that it is his fault. John tells Betty to get out of the country and gives her a stack of cash to leave with. Guzman came to town looking for his money and John invites him to the San Pedro docks to discuss business. Jason says that they need funding for their designer drugs, so they will give Guzman 80% of his cash and they will pay him regularly. They even have a business proposal written out for him. Meanwhile, Taft is watching them and calling in for backup, but dispatch says that they have diplomatic immunity and not to intervene. Taft says he can't let the suspected drugs and money go. Guzman tries the designer drug and they like it. Jason lowers the cash in the van, but when Taft moves in, he is intercepted by Guzman's people. Guzman drives off after they disarm Taft. Taft then tries to arrest John and Jason. Jason lowers the cash and John goes to stop Taft. John is in a standoff with Taft when Jason shoots him and goes to the van. John is holding Taft and starts calling in a code 3, then tells Jason he is a cop. Jason kills Taft and says, "I don't care, we can make $500 million," and walks to the van. John tries to arrest Jason, so Jason goes to shoot John, but John gets the drop on him. Jason also dies that night. Russell Stevens is now due to testify before the Senate subcommittee. Before he does, Carver uses Betty, who they caught before she left the country, as leverage to get Russell not to badmouth the DEA or law enforcement. If he puts in good words for him and the agency, then Betty will go free. During the hearing, Russell plays ball and gives a glowing report about Carver and the DEA, but at the end, he plays a videotape of Guzman at the docks trying the drugs and generally being a naughty boy. Some officials are up in arms, and as usual, a senator tries to protect the guilty. After Carver says, "What the flip?" Russell's lawyer says he kept his end of the bargain. Russell punches Carver and leaves holding hands with Betty. Finally, we see Russell visit Belinda's grave with James. He narrates that he kept $11 million from the van and says if he keeps it, he is a criminal. If he gives it to the government, he is a fool. And if he tries to do some good with it, maybe it just makes things worse. He asks, "What would you do?" Let us know what you would do in the comments. I hope that you enjoyed this one. It offers some interesting social commentary. Thanks for watching. Peace out.